Hello, I'm Mark Childhouse, and because things on the internet seem to lose their date references pretty quick, today is Sunday, September 24th, 2023. On August 4th, 2023, Friday, we drove from Ramona, California to Santa Monica to visit the Museum of Flying right next to the Santa Monica Airport. It was a 3-hour drive, and if you were to make it from the south, I would recommend you look into going up to 5, then going across to 10, and going south a mile or so, I think it is, to the airport, rather than taking what Google Earth and the GPS had us, Garmin GPS had us doing, getting off, going through all the surface streets and whatever else. The streets are a little bit interesting around there. We spent about 2.5 hours in the museum. On social media, on my research, it said really good museum, lots of airplanes, plan on 4 to 5 hours. We spent 2.5. There's probably 20 airplanes total on display. And the signage is really well. There's a lot of dioramas. You're going to see them. There's a lot of photos. There's a lot of models. It is an informative museum. It does have some interesting aircraft. Has a replica of the Wright Flyer, the replica that was used in Night at the Smithsonian, Battle of the Smithsonian, Night at the Museum, whatever. The fun movie. Has a Vega that's also used in that movie, replica again. I think it's a replica. Anyways, several of their aircraft are replicas, really nicely done. They are identified as such. They aren't trying to pause those off. If I were to tell you, or if you were to tell me you were going up there, I would tell you to plan on 2 to 2.5 hours to tour the museum. And due to its travel time from San Diego County, try to find something else to do on the way up. It ended up being just a lot of travel time for 2.5 hours in the museum. Close to 6 hours of travel time for 2.5 hours in the museum. It's worth the trip. The admission fee is reasonable. I don't remember what it was. The docent was very good. There were several other groups in the museum at the time, and he tried to split his time fairly well, and he did so. Nice museum to visit. But as I said, or I'm implying, it's for San Diego County, it's quite a haul, close to 3 hours of travel time, and that's outside of traffic using HOV lanes. So let's get on with it and show you some of the photo work. Thanks.
When you pull into the parking lot, this is the first scene you're going to see. You're going to see the corrugated aluminum building with the Museum of Flying on the side of it and the nose section of a FedEx 727. During your access to the museum after you pay your admission, you're going to be able to get up to the cockpit, up to the cockpit of that 727. And throughout the museum, you're going to find really neat signage. In my opinion, really neat signage. It tells you about the aircraft or about the display you're seeing, and frequently it'll tell you about the specific airplane you're looking at. Here's one of the interior displays associated with the 727 and numerous other airliners. The Pratt & Whitney JT8D turbofan, one of the most popular turbine engines used, and went into a lot of airliners. And they have a working model of it. One of the outdoor displays at the museum is a Douglas A4 Skyhawk. This one here, painted to represent the Blue Angels. It did not fly the Blue Angel in the Blue Angels. It was had items removed when it was loaned from the National Museum of Naval Aviation, which is in Pensacola, Florida. And this aircraft was just an absolutely super aircraft for the United States Navy and Marine Corps. You know, some things just go wrong. This is just a bad place to put a screw and a sign. This is a North American F-86 Sabre jet. These were referred to as blow tube jets. The air came in through the nose, went literally straight through the fuselage, came out the tailpipes, processing through the turbine engine. Again, this is an outdoor display. Really, really nice presentation. The Cessna 172, and you'll frequently hear it as the Cessna 172 Skyhawk, as this one is labeled. Chances are this is a straight 172. The Skyhawk had wheel pants, had a better interior, had some other stuff, cost you a little bit more money. Chances are this was a Skyhawk coming out of the factory. It was modified for Los Angeles traffic control, and if you look at it, it has extra windows on the side. Inside it has an extra seat, a seat that swivels left and right, has binoculars, telescopes, stuff like that, so that they can watch the traffic. It was slick. I'd never seen something like this before. An airport aircraft fire rescue vehicle. There was no signage on this. I can only assume that it came across from the Santa Monica Airport, which is across the street. These things just have interesting factors, and if you look at some of the accidents for aircraft on airports, when these things respond, quite often the man and crew doesn't have to get out until the fire is out. During our visit, the DC-3 that's out in front of the building, which is actually, and I was looking at the write-up for it, is actually a C-53, and it was undercover, under wraps. They're currently doing a restoration effort, a maintenance type effort on it, and if I understood it right, they were going to make a shelter to cover it. Wish we could have seen it. The DC-3, C-47, C-53 series aircraft, phenomenal history. Not everything that's designed works out. As you walk in, above you is the Teledyne Ryan AQM-81 Firebolt. Really neat system. Rocket, throttleable rocket, up to 100,000 feet, Mach 4. It was designed as a high-speed target for the fighter aircraft and defensive aircraft of the United States Navy and the Air Force, and it didn't work out, so it never went into production. Well, if you're a fan of Snoopy and the Red Baron, the Fokker DR1 was something that will strike you in the heart and just make you feel warm. The write-up is exceptional, and it explains quite a bit of the history of the Fokker triplane, which was a really well-constructed airplane, well-flown airplane, but because of the numerous problems that it had, particularly with construction, it was only active on the front lines from August of 1917 to May of 1918, so it was there for less than a year. However, it earned a very powerful reputation, i.e. the song and the Red Baron. There are quite a few airplanes and models of airplanes hung in the overhead, so you have to be looking up. Here's a sailplane and a racer. Really nice display. Wish you could see a little bit more of them, but great information on them. And going to the movies, here's a copy of a replica of the Wright Flyer, and as you read the information on this, this is a replica. It's donated to the museum by 20th Century Fox, and it appeared in the movie Night at the Museum's Battle of the Smithsonian, which was just a fun movie to watch. There was a lot of information and a good pictorial of this aircraft. Over by the Navion display, which you'll see in a little bit, a neat airplane. Here's this one about the SPAD, and I think it's the guy's grandfather or great-grandfather who actually flew the airplane that these remnants came from during World War I. Here's the Navion, and the Navion, as the write-up states, has been made by a number of different companies. Very good design, very good structure, improved by everybody who bought it sequentially from the people who did it the first time. Never flew one. Talked to a number of people who flew them in, working as a ramp rat, or having worked on a couple of them as an A&P, and everybody loved this airplane. And sitting next to it is a Navy practice bomb. Now, I just assumed they needed a place to put it, so they put it there. If I was going to build an aircraft myself, this is what I would be building. The Rotaway Sport helicopter. It's a two-place light helicopter, 1,600 pounds gross weight. Absolutely fantastic design. A lot of people have built them. Talked to a couple of people that own them and have flown them, and they absolutely love them. They think they're great. I'm envious of anybody who's got one. The Strope Starbuster, and I probably butchered the guy's name, is another home built. And if you read the specs on this thing, it's kind of an interesting design. It's a steel tubing or aluminum tubing frame, 4130 steel frame covered by fabric. It uses a fair amount of plywood for its ribs and structure. Single seat, home built. Been flying for more than 50 years according to the write-up. Really looks nice, and you kind of wonder why these aircraft are in the museum. Probably because they are home built, and a whole lot of people don't want to buy and fly something that somebody else built and they cannot inspect during construction. Just suspicious. Bert Rutan builds unusual airplanes, to say the least. Here's the very vegan. According to the write-up of the 600 plus plans that were sold, only 20 were flying. I've seen a couple of these flying. They were in EAA chapters at various places, and the guys that I talked to liked them, thought they were fun to fly, whatever. Another one very similar to it is the Rutan Very Easy. This one's up in the overhead, so you can't really see it. But one of the interesting things with this is the nose gear. When you park it and get out of it, you collapse the nose gear and set the thing down in the nose, and you let it rest. Now, one of the fun things with this particular airplane is we went over to the Santa Monica airport across the street, and there was one parked on the flight line. One of the more unusual aircraft in the Museum of Flying in Santa Monica is the Trotman Road Air. And this was built by a mechanic, retired mechanic of the Douglas Aircraft Company. And he only built one. And as you look at this thing, it's a very interesting design. I wonder if the wheels were powered or if he had to be spinning the prop, which I suspect he did, to motivate down the road. That would have been a drawback. But interesting design. Like the way the wings kind of hid underneath and you pop them out and you drive around. The propeller is shielded by the massive elevator that's up between the verticals. So it does look like a safe design. The write-up says it was flown at least once, but there's no proof that it was actually flown. Beautiful example of a Waco GXE Model 10 sitting in the museum, and it talks about how the seating arrangement was. This was a three-person airplane with two cockpits, and the reason that the passenger was normally carried in the front seat, or the passengers normally carried in the front seat, was they were at the point of center of gravity. So it didn't matter whether they were there or not to maintain gravity. The pilot always had to be in the back cockpit for center of gravity issues. If he had flown the aircraft from the front cockpit without anybody in the back, he would probably have exceeded the forward limits of center of gravity and therefore have control issues. Beautiful airplane. In home-built aviation, there are several different models of Quickies, and this is a Quickie Q2. And my photo of the actual aircraft didn't come out, but what happened to this one is it got turned into a play toy for kids. Interesting design. There is quite a bit of information in the Museum of Flying Museum about Howard Hughes and his exploits, his accomplishments in aviation. He deserves them. And among other things, there's numerous displays, presentations on the HK-1, commonly called the Spruce Goose, even though it's made out of birch, aircraft. And we were in McMinnville, Oregon, at the Evergreen Aviation Museum, and we got to tour inside the HK-1, which was kind of cool. A lot of information here about Howard Hughes and his aircraft, which he built some phenomenal aircraft and deserves all the merits he should get. As you'll probably notice as you go through this presentation, a lot of the museum's exhibits are pictures of aircraft rather than the actual aircraft. The T-33, Lockheed T-33, was an aircraft that when I was going through airframe power plant school, several of them were donated to us. At that time, they were operational or coming out of operational status, and we got to work on them. This is the first jet engine I'd ever operated. The engine that's in this, and the J-33 engine, which is a centrifugal compressor, was sitting here next to this thing, and there's a cockpit simulator for training. Didn't do anything, it just pick out the gauges. But the J-33 that was in this was the first engine I ever ran. And unusual presentations, things you don't expect, up on the second floor of the museum, which is nicely adorned with numerous exhibits, is the Douglas boardroom table. And it's set up, you can see it, and a number of models hanging around it. In the upper left hand corner is a P2. I got to fly in one of those. That was fun. Beautiful, beautiful workmanship on this table. The museum uses a lot of models, a lot of pictures to present information, which is like really cool. B-25 Mitchell bomber. I didn't see any write-up on this, but it was flown off the USS Hornet to do the attack over Tokyo. The AT-6 Texan, which was a trainer, a World War II era trainer, post-World War II as well, and then it got phased out by a number of aircraft, and one of the aircraft that phased it out was the T-28. This happens to be an Alpha model T-28 Air Force. It had the small engine. The Navy T-28, which was the Bravo and the Charlie, had the bigger 1800 engines on it. And then my favorite is here, the North American F-107 Ultra Sabre. There were only 3 of these ever made. One of them was destroyed in a mishap. One is on display at the Pima Air and Space Museum in Tucson, Arizona. The other one is on display at Wright-Patterson. Kind of cool. And then the North American T2 Buckeye. 3 versions of this, the Alpha, which was single engine, the Bravo, which was twin engine, and then the Charlie, which was the enhanced twin engine model. And I've got 1100 plus hours in the Charlie. Fun airplane to fly. The museum uses a lot of models, a lot of pictures to present information, which is like really cool. B-25 Mitchell bomber. I didn't see any write-up on this, but it was flown off the USS Hornet to do the attack over Tokyo. The AT-6 Texan, which was a trainer, a World War II era trainer, post-World War II as well, and then it got phased out by a number of aircraft, and one of the aircraft that phased it out was the T-28. This happens to be an Alpha model T-28 Air Force. It had the small engine. The Navy T-28, which was the Bravo and the Charlie, had the bigger 1800 engines on it. And then my favorite is here, the North American F-107 Ultra Sabre. There were only 3 of these ever made. One of them was destroyed in a mishap. One is on display at the Pima Air and Space Museum in Tucson, Arizona. The other one is on display at Wright-Patterson. Kind of cool. And then the North American T2 Buckeye. 3 versions of this, the Alpha, which was single engine, the Bravo, which was twin engine, and then the Charlie, which was the enhanced twin engine model. And I've got 1100 plus hours in the Charlie. Fun airplane to fly. If there was a sign for the Douglas Genie Air 2 missile, I missed it, and I apologize for that. It is a nuclear air-to-air, unguided, rocket-propelled missile, and it was used by the Air Force during the Cold War. And when production ended in 1962, according to Wikipedia, over 3,000 had been made. No signage, or I missed it. The Douglas Aircraft Company has a historic lineage, and unfortunately most of it's shown through pictures, through models. So this, the XO2D-1, was a float plane. It was shown by a model that was hung up in the overhead. Looks impressive. It appears to be an amphibious land, either sea or on the runway. The YO-31A was monoplane, obviously for the Army Air Corps during the 1920s, according to the write-up. And again, a model hanging up in the overhead. Now, one that every once in a while is referenced elsewhere, the Douglas B-18 Bolo. Even though it's B-18, it was antiquated actually by the time World War II broke out and the B-17 out of Boeing superseded it. Specifically, it was a twin-engine aircraft that was designed to meet some specific specs that the B-17 was not designed to meet. The B-17 was designed to different specs by Boeing, but again, depicted by a model hanging in the overhead. This museum is partially a biography to Donald Douglas, the founder and leading executive in the Douglas Aircraft Company, and there's a number of displays on him. One of the more interesting items in here is the Douglas World Cruiser, and what happened was Douglas Aircraft Company built 2 of these aircraft and or more, and they were flown around the world for record attempts, and there is a lot of lineage. This is a monstrous airplane. The photo with him and his family standing next to it just dwarfs him. It is single engine, and there is a model of it in a display case. In the mid-60s and into the 70s, supersonic passenger transport was the way to go, and virtually every aircraft manufacturer in the world entered the market. The only 2 to put them in the air were the Soviet Union with their Tupolev, and the consolidation of the British and the French with the SST. And this was Douglas's proposal, and never got off the ground. With the B-18 Bolo being literally obsolete the day it came off the assembly line, usually tasked to the Asian and South American duty stations, they were damaged in Manila during the attack in Manila and in Hawaii. Douglas came up with the B-23. They took the wings off the DC-3, put it on, enhanced the airplane a little bit. They did get a contract to make these. Only 38 aircraft were made. It didn't have the performance, didn't have the armament of the B-17, so it was a no-go. Going through my aeronautics training, early 1970s, winglets were just coming up into research, and it was decided that they did reduce the fuel consumption, increase the efficiency, and also reduce the noise. So the aircraft benefited by having winglets, and now virtually everything out there in the way of commercial aviation is carrying winglets. Really nice presentation on how these work. Really nice mural up on the wall, Fly Navy. And aircraft companies tend to grab a tendency to name their aircraft. Douglas liked putting something Sky in their name, so they have the A4 Skyhawk, they have the A3 Sky Warrior, also known as the Whale, the F4 Sky Ray, and a number of aircraft, all the Sky Raider, the A1, all along the same way. And with the A1 Sky Raider, there were numerous versions. Fantastic aircraft, the A4. I wish I would have gotten at least one flight in it. And I do catch my wife by surprise every once in a while, and I have no idea why a torpedo is sitting under the Fly Navy A4 mural. Many of the aircraft manufacturers were building and flying experimental test aircraft. Most of it was funded by the U.S. government through the military, and shown here is the Douglas D558-1 Skystreak. The second version, the Dash 2 version, is shown being launched from the wing of a B-29. It appears to be rocket powered, and it flew at Mach 2 or over Mach 2. The Douglas XA-2D-1 Skyshark, counter-rotating twin-engine aircraft. It did not go into production. It did fly. It was just slower. Bill Bridgman was Douglas's test pilot. Why he didn't fly all their aircraft, don't know, because Scott Caulfield is credited with flying a couple of theirs into the record-breaking flights. And then the F-4D Skyray, which is an interesting design, just in appearance, flying, and it flew for the United States Navy off aircraft carriers. Slick looking airplane. Several interesting displays in this museum, and one of them is this display, a presentation on how the Douglas Aircraft Company was camouflaged during World War II. It was basically netted, and if you look at very carefully at the netting that is installed over the plant, it is painted to be a neighborhood. So it represented from the air a neighborhood, and they eventually had to take it down, or could take it down. Another of the experimental aircraft from Douglas was the X-3 Stiletto, and if you look at it, it's named after women's high heels. It deserved that title. The unfortunate thing was the engine that was supposed to power this, jet engine that was supposed to power this, was never produced. So it never flew as high, as fast, as far as it was designed to, because it lacked a proper power plant. We've seen the Lockheed SR-71 in numerous museums along the way, and they have, again, pictures, model presentation. This is a unique version because it has an extended tail for a sensor bay. Kind of interesting. Had not seen that before, and the particular aircraft that's shown here is actually in the Air and Space Museum at Dulles International Airport. Another replica, the Lockheed Vega, is a replica. The DR-1 is a replica. The Wright Flyer is a replica. Several aircraft in the museum are replicas. I'm not sure what they all are. The Vega they talk about is another movie star. Night at the Museum, Battle of the Smithsonian, which was a fun movie to watch. Beautiful restoration, beautiful recreation of the aircraft, and an aircraft with a distinct lineage to it. It was flown by a number of notable flyers at the time. Going to jump through a hodgepodge of some photos. For example, this one here, T-34 Bravos. There's a Mustang picture in this display case. A number of other aircraft, and they were all associated. This one was associated with women flying. More models, a lot of models around this place, and a lot of memorabilia that came off of pilots. I have a lot of my memorabilia. My daughter wants it. The Bell X-1 among others, and that vertical takeoff land pogo jet off to the right, bottom right, is an aircraft that flew at Brown Field for its tests. It never worked out, so it didn't go anywhere. The flying wing is out of Northrop, and Northrop is great for flying wings. Those were created before, during, and after World War II, and then we ended up with the B-2 flying wing bomber. A picture of the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, the cockpit section, all glass, and not the type of aircraft I flew. The Boeing Beaumark missile was ramjet powered. If they had a picture of it alone, I missed it, and I apologize for that. All I have is this signage. But this led us into the display of the ramjet, and the ramjet is used quite often in experimental type aircraft, and the hypersonic stuff is, I think, going to be a ramjet as well. It's going to be interesting. So here was a display that explained the ramjet and showed a ramjet, and this one is out of the Beaumark. A museum's obligation is to present information, to present material, and one of the items they presented is a Mitsubishi G4M bomb sight, which was kind of interesting. It was invented or created for the Betsy bombers during World War II. Kind of interesting. throughout the museum, they had a number of these dioramas, and I'm going to show you some of them, not all of them. Really well crafted, really well presented. They were inside plexiglass cases, which gave us a reflectivity issue, but they were beautifully done. Another one of the interesting displays at the museum was this Fly Navy Jet Pilot display. So it's got an F-8, it's got an F-14, and then it's got the P-2V. This P-2V has radial engines on it, if I'm not mistaken. I can't really see it all that well. It looks like radials, but it has jet-assisted takeoff, so I guess you could classify it as a jet pilot. And in this pictorial, it has a T-2V, which is a derivative of the T-33, adapted for the Navy for flight training, for carrier operations, the F-14, the Tomcat. Really nice presentation. And a lot of the survival gear, very similar to what I wore. There's an ejection seat there, and they're showing a F-8 ejection off one of the aircraft carriers. And this one here had me stumped for a little bit. I was trying to figure it out. It's the throttle quadrant off of a P-2 Neptune, a Lockheed P-2 Neptune. Pretty complex, but it is a recip because a couple of the knobs control the blowers to superchargers on the airplane. And then came up to this one. It's a ship's bell. It's a mess bell, not the ship's bell. It's the mess bell from the Arizona, and it's on display. Not sure how this got here, but it's here. If you watch the news over any period of time, chances are you will see a news event where a jet engine destructs partially destructs in the air, throws a fan blade. Here's a GE-90 engine. It is a monstrous engine. It's used on a lot of the twin engine aircraft, and it has a presentation about one of the fan blades. The Convair CV-240, which is also the T-29, which was used by the Navy as a trainer, and the C-131, which was used by the Navy and the Air Force as a passenger transport and air ambulance, is available as a cockpit display and several photos, which is kind of cool. I've ridden in these, and they've been upgraded numerous times through the years. Very versatile aircraft built by Convair. Hanging in the overhead is a P-40 Warhawk. It has a number of names, P-40 Tomahawk, whatever. It's a Curtiss-built airplane and made its history primarily with General Chanute and the Flying Tigers. Walking along one of the compartments, one of the areas of the museum, found the presentation that says what is a blueprint and how is it used, and the airplane that it represented was the Republic CB, which is an airplane I always thought was kind of cool, kind of neat. I'd love to own one. They were pretty popular when they came out, and they've lasted, and you'll still find a few of them flying around. They are amphibious. They can land on the runway by putting their wheels down, or they can land on the water by leaving them up, and then they can lower their wheels once they're in the water and taxi up on a ramp. But I'm used to blueprints that contain data that show specifications, and these didn't. I was associated with an aviation education group here in San Diego County, and we were going to put a presentation on for the Boy Scouts. And one of the subjects that came up was a wind tunnel, and we were told by people that were in the profession, active in the profession, that there wasn't one available, and it was going to have to be addressed in pictures or something like that. And I said, I'm going to make one. And I was told I can't make one. Well, challenged the naval aviator. So I went home and started building, and I used a leaf blower, and it worked very effective. And I've made airfoils, and I used it to teach my high school classes. I turned it over to my daughter. She uses it in her physics classes today. She's hooked up an electric yard blower to it. I had gas, so it was pretty loud, but it works just fine. And They have a wind tunnel here, shown here, and mine's about the same size. This hot air balloon basket was sitting off facing the right flyer, which was probably appropriate. Hot air balloons have been flying since at least the 1700s, so they're relevant. And the museum does educate you quite a bit. This is a presentation on roll, pitch, and yaw as associated with aircraft and how it works, which was kind of cool, something you frequently get into. And it talks about the Bernoulli principle. If it weren't for Bernoulli, airplanes wouldn't fly, because he created the principle that makes them fly. Off on one of the bays is this what's referred to as learning aid E6B computer. It's about 3 feet high. The actual size is down in the right hand corner. It's hanging there. I still have mine. It's a great slide rule. As a naval aviator, I used this. People looked at me like I was kind of weird. Works really well, and it does a lot of things for you once you learn how to use it. A cornerstone of aviation is the Piper Cub. I've never seen a Piper Cub without the cub on the tail. This is a model. Like a lot of things, you can see the B-25 hanging in the background. This is a model of a Piper Cub, and somebody's cartoonish presentation of the cockpit of the Piper Cub. I'm going to leaf through these. A number of these display cases with beautiful models in them. This is the Spaceship One and its mothership, and as we move on, a lot of military models, civilian models that went into here. A lot of interesting stuff. There were cards in here that if you could get a good photo of them, you could figure out what they were. Display cases with airliners, memorabilia from people. Beautifully done, beautifully restored, really nicely done, and informative. Not a whole lot of actual airplanes here. If there was signage for this monoplane, I missed it. I assume it's probably French, European, probably mid-1910s type time frame. It's associated with the Wright Flyer, or it's in that display anyways. Lots of photos around the museum. As I said before, some really beautiful photos. Most of them are labeled as to what they are, and I'm just going to click through several of them as they come up and let you look at them, and they're really interesting. There were several presentations associated with women in aviation. This particular one was flight attendants. Then my wife, who was my co-pilot on a number of flights, this particular woman, I believe the statue was wearing a set of pilot's wings. Women were essential to aviation in a number of arenas, including the WASP program during World War II. Along the way, I worked for Montgomery Wards and used to get to spend a fair amount of time up with the operators, and I actually learned how to operate the switchboard and would stand in for them during their breaks. And my wife would work for GTE while I was in college, and we are familiar with these types of switchboards. The one at Montgomery Wards was actually very similar to this. Hers was a little more modern. The docent, and I apologize for not remembering his name, I actually don't think I got it, was excellent, providing a lot of information to us, but he was hopping around with numerous groups, with several groups that were visiting the museum at that time, so that was appropriate for him. He was explaining this was actually a C-54, I believe he said. It carried General Eisenhower during World War II. It's a DC-3 version, militarized DC-3, so it might be C-53. But he was explaining what the buildings along the road were. So we took a drive, and I'm going to show you some of those buildings, and we'll just let you go with that. One of the things the docent did clue us in on was we could go across the street to Santa Monica Airport, go up to the second or third floor, and actually look over the airport. Okay, I'm a pilot. I've got a lot of hours, but I was just curious. We walked over. Here's a Yak 52. It's a trainer parked out on the ramp. If you notice anything about this aircraft, its engine spins the wrong way. Instead of clockwise, it spins counterclockwise, and it has shutters for cooling, which is interesting. Here's a view looking down the ramp. We're watching a number of vehicles where it says stop, just blow through it. When if you lose view, looking west, the other view is looking east, looking west. This is the rest of that single runway airport. It is control towered, and it wasn't real active, but it was fun. Enjoyed the trip. Not a lot of airplanes in this museum. A lot of educational information. Probably a 2 to 3 hour stopover on the way to something else. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.